Welcome to part one of our two-part discussion. The National Council of Teachers of Mathematics welcomes you to Adding It All Up, a podcast created by and for mathematics educators and teachers. Join us each month as we explore current topics, insights, and emerging trends with thought leaders in the math community. And now, the hosts of Adding It All Up, NCTM President Latrenda Knighten and NCTM President-elect Dewey Gottlieb.
Welcome, listeners, back to Adding It All Up. We are so excited about this month's episode. When I think about just my career as a teacher, I can think about all of those moments when I've had students. And as a coach, sometimes I've had teachers say, I'm not a math person. I just need you to know I'm not a math person. And so the first time I heard this, I thought everyone's a math person because we use math every day, and thought, we could just move on and continue with whatever activity or whatever lesson that was planned. But I bet a lot of you out there know that this doesn't just happen one time. It's not an unusual occurrence. It happens again and again and again. And so it really began to sink in that there are a lot of people, a lot of students who really carry a belief with them that they are not math people. And this affects how they interact with mathematics in the classroom, how they interact with each other. And if you're working with coaches or with teachers, that happens for adults as well. And so there are some people I can recall that won't even look at a problem. Like I had students, if there were too many words, I'm not a math person, so I'm just going to sit this one out, Miss Knighten. This is not for me. And I began to realize that this had nothing to do with their ability as a mathematician. It really was about their identity, whether or not they saw themselves as learners and doers of mathematics. And it really had a negative effect on their confidence about mathematics.
Yeah, you're right, Latrenda. This whole notion of students expressing this "I'm not a math person" idea. On the surface, it kind of might seem that they don't like math. But if you're willing to dig a little bit deeper, you find there's a story behind those words. It could have been a particular math class. It could be that they did poorly on a test. But there's all these messages that students receive, whether it's culturally messages from family members and friends, memes they see in social media, or how math people are portrayed in movies and TV shows. So there's all these messages and experiences kind of add up. And you can see how students start to develop this notion of math trauma that we're going to be talking about today. And it's not just their students. A lot of teachers have the same experience. I was fortunate. I had a lot of really great teachers, math teachers, particularly when I was going through school. But then I got to trigonometry in 11th grade and I just hit a wall. I mean, that was really an experience for me. I was, whoa, maybe I'm just not a math person. I mean, it really turned me off. I checked out of math when I was in 11th grade. And fortunately, when I was in college and I had a math professor who turned the light back on for me. Yeah, this is something that kind of builds as through multiple experiences over time. And I just love that we're talking about this topic today.
I am too. And Dewey, I can definitely relate to your experience in high school. For me, the first time I hit that wall was 10th grade geometry. And some people who've heard me talk about this have heard me mention this before. For that, I saw myself as one of the math people because I like numbers. I like math. And the way geometry was taught and my experience was very negative. It was very unfulfilling. And so going into my junior year, I didn't know what to expect because that 10th grade year was not very positive. But thanks to a wonderful teacher, I always give a shout out to Miss Rutledge, Algebra Q. She made everything connect. Everything was making sense. I was like, okay, maybe I am a math person. Of course, now as an adult, I know that there's no such thing because we are all math people because we use mathematics all the time, everywhere. But sometimes it takes those little roadblocks that sometimes put those barriers in your way. So those things can stay with you for a couple years, or they can hopefully be removed if they have the right pieces in place. And so sometimes you don't think about it, until you start to think back and reflect on your relationship with mathematics and how you interact with those things. So it's really important that we are talking about this today so that people feel comfortable, I think, sharing their experiences and thinking about maybe what are some of the things they did to help or support them as they got through some of those roadblocks.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a really important point because when we reflect on our personal experiences, we can definitely see similarities in our students, and we see this kind of playing out in classrooms. And it's been kind of the standard math narrative. And in a way, we kind of just accept it. Yeah, some kids are just going to develop that. And we shouldn't accept that. Absolutely. So what do we do differently? And how can we provide teachers with a vision of what that might look like? And, that's why I feel like we're really fortunate to have Vanessa Vakharia, the math guru, here with us today to dig into this idea about not just what math trauma is, but how it shows up, how it persists and why, but also what we can do to help students, to find their confidence and the joy in math again. So I'm really happy to introduce our friend here, Vanessa Vakharia. I've heard lots about you. I've read your book. You're such an interesting person. There's so much to your life more than what you do in the math education world as a teacher and a speaker. I just find you really fascinating. So excited you're with us here today. And why don't you take a moment and introduce yourself to our listeners, please?
Oh my gosh. Well, you said so many things that I just want to scream about. So, this is a really great start. For everyone listening, my name's Vanessa. It's really nice to be here. And my absolute favorite topic is math trauma and how we can help everyone build better relationships with math. And I just honestly think the hardest question in the world is like, tell me a bit about yourself and introduce yourself. So, I'm already having a performance anxiety. A few things I can tell you are that I'm actually sitting right now in my Toronto tutoring studio. So I've owned a tutoring studio for almost 14 years now, where our whole goal is to change stereotypes about what it means to be a quote unquote math person and to help everyone build better relationships with math. I just published a book called Math Therapy, which are the 5 steps that I've been using my entire life as a teacher to help students heal their math trauma. What else can I tell you? I'm in a rock band called Goodnight Sunrise, and it might not sound relevant, but the reason I'm in that band is because of the next fact, which I'll tell you, which is that I failed grade 11 math twice and then had the most amazing teacher who I will also shout out, Eva Kaczynska. We're still best friends to this day, and she kind of showed me what it means to fail and what it means to succeed and how those two things are, if they were in a Venn diagram, they would be just a circle. So that really changed my entire life. That's why I ended up starting a band. That's why I do the work I do today. And my mission is to just help every single person out there see that they can have a better relationship with math than they have right now. And as a result, a better relationship with themselves.
That was a wonderful introduction.
Oh my God. As I was saying it, I was like, I normally actually just shut down and say I refuse to answer that question, but you're both so nice. I was like, don't do this. Like, just try. And as I was saying it, I was like picking up steam and I was like, wow, I can do hard things. I can introduce myself.
But Vanessa, I'm so excited just to hear more from you today. As we all referenced math trauma, Dewey, myself, and you in our opening discussions. But I would like to hear you share with our listeners how you define math trauma and what does it look like in students and how is it different than math anxiety?
Wow, coming in strong with a 3-step problem. Okay. Perfect. I always say this is probably the most important question to kick things off because as mathematicians, we should always define our terms to make sure we're talking about the same thing. I love this question. So here's exactly how I define math trauma. Math trauma is a negative experience with math that sticks with you long after the experience is over. Like, I want us to just pause and take that in. It's a negative experience with math that sticks with you long after the experience is over. And I'm going to add to that because, of course, when we use the word trauma, we're all like, whoa, like, what's going on? Are we being dramatic? I've learned so much about trauma in this work and also like with my own work with my therapist. And when we talk about trauma, we have to be very careful. There are 2 major categories of trauma that are relevant right now. One of them is what's called like big T trauma. And when we use the word trauma, we're often thinking about that. They are experiences that are for the most part, beyond our scope as educators to deal with, right? When we have big T trauma in our classrooms, we have resources, we have other specialists to talk to about that who are going to deal with them. But when we're talking about math trauma, it's not that there's no big T trauma that happens with math trauma. And by the way, big T trauma, like an example might be like displacement because of an earthquake. You know what I mean? Like we're talking about things that we really don't have the expertise to deal with. There is math trauma that is big T trauma, unfortunately, but a lot of the math trauma that we see falls under the category of little T trauma, also known as micro trauma, also known as sneaky trauma. These are things I like to liken them to microaggressions. They're things that seem benign or they seem common, but that they have that exact effect. They stick with you long after the experience is over and they cause a wound. I'll get into more about that in a second, but little T trauma might be something like someone was just told, oh, don't worry about it. Don't worry about doing this question. You just need to pass. You don't need to get a good mark. You've got other strengths. Imagine being told that and what message you would get. Wow, this person doesn't even believe I can do it. Imagine now being told that by multiple people. A teacher tells you that, a parent tells you that, a friend tells you that. Now, just like microaggressions, it builds up and that wound gets bigger, it gets more reinforced. Little T trauma might be something like you had a learning difference, you were never diagnosed and given the resources. You opened up a textbook every single year of your 12 years of school. You never saw a single person that looked like you. You were told that your sibling was the mathy one and you're the creative one. You weren't fast enough. You were publicly shamed. There's so many things that fall under the category of things we just deem acceptable in math, right? Where we're like, oh yeah, that happens to me. It just means I'm not a math person. These are the little things where we as educators have this power where when we can avoid doing some of these things. But if we know a student is walking into our class with that kind of baggage, we really have the power to change the equation. The other thing I want to say is, so now we've got our definition of math trauma. It's an experience that sticks with you long after the event is over. It's an experience. It's not an event. And I want to make sure people really know that. Math trauma is not an event. For example, people like to talk about mad minutes a lot, right? Or timed tests cause math anxiety. When we write a timed test, many students will walk away from that timed test experiencing math trauma, right? Let's say just a classic scenario, they know everything, they get into their test, all of a sudden there's the pressure of being timed. Students are rustling their pages next to them because everyone's finishing up. They know the answer, but they can't access it because all of a sudden their nervous system has gone into freeze mode and they leave that test being like, oh my God, I couldn't answer any of the questions. They have had an experience with math trauma. Now, Dewey might be writing that same test and he might walk out of there being like, oh, that was awesome. I had no problem with that at all. That time test, right? He didn't cause any negative emotions in him. And that's why we've got to be careful with statements like timed tests cause math trauma. The event of a timed test, we can't say that that thing causes math trauma. What we can say, however, is many students will leave that time test not feeling so good, and that will be something that contributes to their math trauma. So it is an experience because everyone experiences things differently. We all have every experience based on a lifetime of experiences that we come into that event with. So I always want to just make sure we're being really careful of saying math trauma is an experience we have. It's a negative experience that sticks with us long after the experience is over.
This was great because I love the example that you gave because you gave so many examples that actually if a teacher is listening, that gives them an idea of what does that look like in students and actually gives them ideas on how to avoid adding to those experiences. So I love the example. I love that.
I really want to address your question of you said, what does it look like in students and how is it different from math anxiety? And those questions have the same answer. So this is going to be very efficient. When we talk about math anxiety, we're actually seeing what I like to call like the tip of the iceberg, and math trauma is underneath. So math anxiety actually is almost always a tangible representation of the math trauma that lies within. So math anxiety, for example, what we will see in our classrooms is usually one of the 4 trauma responses. We will see fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. We'll see students fighting. They're arguing with us. They don't want to do the work. They don't know why they have to do this. We'll see them in flight mode, avoidance, absenteeism, right? Like chronic absenteeism is almost always that flight mode response being activated. There's a math trauma that lies beneath and they can't show up to class. Freeze mode. We just talked about that, right? Like they freezing, they know the knowledge, they can't access it. You call on them, suddenly their mind is blank. And the fourth is the fawn response. We don't talk about that a lot. And there's a bigger conversation about that. But the fawn response can look like a student really just trying to please. They really want to be perfect for you. When you see any of that, all of the classic things that go along with math anxiety, somebody literally in panic mode, in fight or flight in their body, they're shaking, their stomach hurts, they feel sick, they are not paying attention to you, their head's on their desk, their eyes are wandering, they're not feeling present. That is fight. That is flight. That is freeze. When you see any of those things, those are the things that are visible to us as educators. You can bet that there is math trauma lurking underneath. That student has had a negative experience with math, probably multiple, that has stuck with them long after that experience is over. And now they are exhibiting signs of math anxiety, but the root of that math anxiety is math trauma.
Wow. Yeah, I absolutely love that metaphor. It's really helpful. I can picture it, and I can recognize it as well. So thank you for that. One of the other things I really appreciate as you talk about math trauma is you encourage people to put themselves, into the conversation, and you're open about your own experiences with math trauma as well. Would you share a little bit about your story and how those experiences maybe have shaped your journey?
It's funny because I've been doing this work. I've really been interrogating my own relationship with math so much and just watching myself. I'll be in a PD. The PDs that really get me going, like get my anxiety spiked, are any elementary PD where they start using manipulatives. Oh my God, guys. I can feel it. My heart starts racing. I all of a sudden can't think. I'm around all these elementary teachers. They're talking about arrays. I'm like, oh my God, oh my God. And I know I can now recognize exactly, because part of it is recognizing what our thought process is because it happens so fast. Most people don't know too much about polyvagal theory, but the way our nervous systems are wired, 80% of the information goes from our body to our brain. That means that we feel anxious before we consciously even know we're anxious or we know what we're anxious about, right? So I'm sitting there, I'm panicking, and I've only recently been like, what am I saying to myself in there? And what I'm saying is, if I can't even do elementary school math, right? I'm a high school math teacher. So I'm used to a certain way of learning and teaching math and things that I'm used to focusing on. I've never heard of an array before. And all of a sudden I'm like, instead of thinking to myself, well, I'm a learner just like everyone else. I've never heard of an array. So here's my opportunity to learn. I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm in an elementary PD here. If I can't even do this elementary math, like people are going to think I'm dumb, like da 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 da. And what it always goes back to is I'm going to prove everyone right who has constantly told me you're not the type of person who should be good at math. And there's so many things. This is why it's sneaky trauma. It's not like I can point to this major incident that changed everything, but in my life, at every juncture, I remember when I did my practicum, I went into my first school to work in the classroom, and I walked into the head of the math department, and he looked at me and he said, "What's a pretty girl like you doing being a math teacher?" And we can all laugh about that, right? I was like, what is this, 1954? Who is this guy? But I remember like, oh God, this guy already thinks like I can't do it. And I mean, you guys probably know I'm on the internet a lot. My biggest platforms is trying to share this knowledge on Instagram. And it's endless. Like every week, every day, someone will make a comment of, I would never take her seriously. She obviously doesn't know what she's talking about. Like, yeah, someone who wears glitter on their eyeshadow can't possibly know this and that. She's a musician. I think for me, the trauma has been what I like to call identity trauma. And this is really big in math education, especially. I know you both probably get it. Very quickly, I'll just say my master's thesis was called Imagining a World Where Paris Hilton Loves Math. And I studied why girls specifically were pushed out of mathematics, where there was such a big underparticipation. And for forever, we have been told that to be a mathematician, a real mathematician, you have to look a certain way, you act a certain way, you speak a certain way. And if you think about it, to date, like I wrote that thesis in 2010, it's 2025, and we still have not seen a single media representation in TV, movies, whatever, of a cheerleader character who is also good at math. And I use that example because it's such a poignant one to be like, what are we being told? What are girls in this case being told? You have to pick. You can either be a girly girl cheerleader or you can be a mathematician. You can't do both. And we're told that not just by media, it's not reinforced by media, but people say it to us all the time. We get these comments. You don't look like a mathematician. My point is, So when I'm sitting in that PD, in that elementary school PD at NCTM, and I don't know what arrays are, I'm thinking, oh my God, I'm going to prove them right. And that is actually a very real thing called stereotype threat, especially in populations that are not mainstream in the field. We feel like the fear is we're going to reinforce some stereotype, not just for us, but for a group of people. Not only are they going to say Vanessa sucks at math, they're going to say, see, girls with tattoos and nose rings can't do math. So anyways, I would say thank you for that therapy session. Actually, I feel a lot better.
Thank you. One of the things I think your fans, and Dewey and I are definitely two of those, that we appreciate is that you are very open and honest about your experiences. And so I think that's very helpful for all of us. So, how did you begin to rebuild your confidence in math? And really, what inspired you to turn that into just this passion of helping so many people?
Well, first of all, I'm really glad to have you two as fans. We could end the podcast here because I feel like I've gotten everything I needed out of it. My ego feels good. Well, the first thing I'll say is it's my constant life work to be trying to internally validate more than externally. And again, it's not like, oh my God, I'm cured. I don't have math anxiety anymore. No, that's absolutely not true. Like, as I said, there are so many situations that come up where I can feel that spiking up again. But I just remember this is when we have a wound, when we have a trauma wound, it's not healed overnight. That being said, honestly, what turned it around for me, and I'm so excited for everyone listening, it was a teacher. It was a teacher who did that for me. It was Eva. It was walking into her classroom after I'd failed grade 11 math twice and her telling me that a math person wasn't even a real thing. It was her taking the time to be like, of course you can do math. And that belief, somebody believing in me and then giving me the chance to prove that her belief was accurate. She was a great teacher, number one. She gave me extra resources. She was there when I needed help. She created a safe environment for me to ask questions and for me to be wrong in. All of the things that probably you guys are all doing who are listening to this, that makes such a big difference because once she did that for me and my mindset changed, and then she gave me the opportunity to prove that I was better at math than I thought I was, it was like a domino effect, right? I wanted to do more and more and more. And I was just sitting there being like, I cannot believe my whole life I've been taught that I wasn't a math person. And I got pissed off. I was like, this is crazy. How do all of my friends think this kind of thing? And I was tutoring the entire class by that point. We would go to this coffee shop. And by the way, I went to this alternative school after I failed grade 11 math twice. It was known in Toronto as the school for misfits. We were all supposed to be these dumb kids that couldn't hack the education system. We were all sent to this school, and that school was the best. It was the best because all the teachers in there didn't believe any of this BS about us being dumb. They were like, you guys are here because you need to learn in a way that you're not being taught. And so I had all my entire class with these kids who just thought they couldn't do it. And I was like tutoring them at the coffee shop. And it was like, aha moments galore. It was like our teacher's dream. And just the high of that. And when I left that school, I didn't just leave thinking, I'm great at math, I'm going to like join NASA or something. I was like, oh my God, I can do this thing I've been literally told I can't do for 18 years. What else can I do? And that sparked what has continued to be a lifetime of possibility and curiosity and just saying, well, what else can I do? What else can I do? And that's actually why I started a rock band. That's a full circle moment to the intro. It's just like, well, can I do this too? I've always wanted to do this, but I was kicked out of my high school choir. Can I do this too? I want everyone to know that this is a lie because what math opens up in you is not just more mathematical thinking and critical thinking and all these incredible skills, but it opens up because it's well documented that well over 50% of kids by the age of 6 have already gotten the idea they're not a math person. And that's a limiting belief. It's a limiting belief that young people form very early on. And it's a very common limiting belief. And once you form a limiting belief in life, you are searching for more things, not consciously, but it's confirmation bias. You're searching for more things that you simply were born unable to do, just like you were born unable to do math. It's easy to write things off and say, oh, I didn't make the soccer team. It's probably because I'm not athletic. Instead of saying, hold on a second, everyone can play soccer. I just need to find my way. So I think that's been the real motivation for the work is I love math, but honestly, I always say math is a gateway drug in a good way. I'm not promoting drugs. It's a gateway to a life of possibility and wondering what else can I do?
Some of the experiences that you've talked about, you've extended this idea about this math trauma to just daily life experience. And I really think that some of the ideas that you share with not just the students that you tutor, but with giving teachers ideas for what they might use in their classroom. Now, these are not just things for the math classroom. These are important life skills and mindsets that we can apply in any aspect of our life, really. It could be day-to-day inconveniences to like some major life challenges. Could you talk a little bit about how this experience with just dealing with this notion of math trauma and trying to address it expands beyond just learning math in the classroom?
Yeah, you know what? I love that you asked that because that is my answer to the question of when will we use math in real life? I think this is exactly it. Of course, there are lots of other answers to that question, but I have always found that that's the one that resonates most with me and most to so many of my students and friends who think that math is kind of pointless is the skills you're learning when you negotiate your relationship with math are skills you will use in every area of your life. In math, what are we doing but solving problems? Like we're solving problems. And literally, as we know from many familiar songs, like I've got 99 problems. I won't go further than that. We all have many problems. Life is full of problems. So I think it's one of the coolest things of not only are you solving problems, in math class, you're told that you're wrong a lot. You get a lot of ego hits in math class that I don't think you often get in many of the other subjects. And working with our egos and our need for validation and what it means to be right versus what it means to not have an answer to something versus what does it mean to actually listen to another person's opinion and change your mind about what the best way to do something is. From that to like the insecurities we face in when we're dealing with a subject, math, that we have been told is the symbol of what makes someone intelligent. It's not fair and it's not correct, but we have been told in our society time and time again that mathematical intelligence is the superior intelligence. We don't call Picasso smart. We don't call Mozart intelligent. We call them creative, talented. Whenever someone's quote unquote good at math, they are deemed smart. So you're now talking about negotiating your identity in a space where whether or not you succeed is supposed to be this symbol of how worthy you are. So all those conversations and how hard it is to actually reckon that. How do you match up those things? How do you sit there and say, just because I'm wrong at this problem, just because I didn't do it the way the teacher wanted me to, just because I made a mistake, that doesn't say anything about my worth. How I come back from that, what I learned from that does. Like, these are like the skills that are going to propel you forward into a life where anything is possible. And I think what I want for everyone on the planet, I think what teachers probably all want for their children, and I want this for all teachers, I want this for every person. I want us to all be in the world thinking anything is possible. That my dreams, whatever my heart wants, whatever my desires are, whatever brings me joy, I can get there. I can go down that path. I can go that way. I can take the risks needed to get there, and my ego won't take such a hit that I'll be so scared to fail that I won't even try.
Stay tuned for part 2 of this exciting discussion.